Wake up, wake up.
Wake up, everybody. No more sleeping in bed. No more backwards thinking. Time for thinking ahead. The world has changed so very much from what it used to be. There's so much hatred, war and poverty. Wake up, all the teachers, time to teach a new way. Maybe then they'll listen to what you have to say. They're the ones who's coming up. The world is in their hands. When you teach the children, teach them the best you can.
Scream peace, do we mean it? Can you feel it when we scream it out loud? Do you believe that we need it? Do you believe that it could get right? Do you believe that the children of the world deserve a good life? Well, if you do, it's time to wake up your mind. We can make it better, and I know it might take some time, but we gotta start somewhere. How about with you and me? From us it goes to others, then we'll have a you. Okay. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of W.A.G.E, Women Advocating for Gender Equality. Tonight you're in for a treat. I'm so glad that we were able to bring to you someone who's going to be co-hosting, and she's also a guest. She's friend to the show. And before I even say who it is, I just want to talk a little bit about the six episode series that we're doing at W.A.G.E, Married to the Lie. Tonight, we're going to be talking about manufactured reality. There's a lot of things that are going on now that I think if we have the information, we'll be able to consume and understand and absorb things a little bit better so that we won't be so stressed, so that we won't feel so much anxiety, so that we can know, behold, and understand exactly what it is that's going on. And all of the time, I don't have the answers, right? But check it out. We're going to take this voyage because I always know the people who do. So with that being said, I want to introduce you to our one and only, absolutely awesome and incredible Linda Carter, Esquire. Professor Linda Carter, Esquire, right? Community advocate, community elder, community lawyer, right? Right here from the hometown of Newark. Hello, Professor Carter. How are you this evening?
Hello, Sheila Montague. How are you this evening?
I am well. I'm excited to have you here. For those watching, if you haven't shared this show, please share it. Very pertinent information. It's really going to help us understand a lot of things that's happening now. Professor Carter, if you would like to just tell them a little bit more about yourself, please.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to give some highlights, not so much what I did for a job, but the things that made me who I am and why I do what I do. So first of all, at 12 years old, I was protesting Vietnam. And how would I know to protest Vietnam? Because at that time, some of you may know about intergenerational conversations. Well, we lived intergenerational. And my elders were 18, 19, and 20-year-olds coming back from Vietnam who educated me about what's socialism, capitalism, fascism, all the isms. And I got that from 18, 19-year-olds returning from Vietnam who encouraged me to protest Vietnam. The other thing was living in Newark in I guess you say a Black ecosystem where everything we needed was right there for us. There was no need for us to go outside our community. Anything we wanted was in the community. We only went out, like rarely did we have to go out. The other thing is, so many things. Living in public housing. I grew up in public housing, which is exactly 2 blocks. Was located 2 blocks from where I live now. I still live in the same community. I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine living somewhere else. The public library. At the time, my dad wasn't really into luxuries. And for him to get a new television was a luxury. So instead of television, my brothers and I'm the oldest of 8 and 9, we would go to the Newark Public Library all the time. And I read everything I can get my hands on. So that had a lot to do with it. Also, I grew up with people who have been sharecroppers. If you don't know what a sharecropper is, it's a person who thought they were going to get paid and they didn't get paid, unlike an enslaved person who knew they weren't going to get paid. So, that's a little bit about me. Those are what I consider the important parts of my life that really influenced me. And, when your baseline, particularly my father was raised by his grandmother who had been an enslaved person but was treated as property. That's why they call it chattel. So knowing my family history on all sides, it has a lot to do with who I am today and why I did. And as I told Sheila, normally I don't come out on Valentine's Day, but for young people 50 and under, if it's 24 hours, I'm gonna make it 26 just to be there. Because I think, our job as elders is to make sure we give you everything we have. What you do with it is up to you, because it's a different time. But you should not have to, and that's what I'm going to talk about. You should not have to reinvent the wheel. And unfortunately, for the last 3 generations, 6 decades, you have something which Sheila talked about, the manufacturing of a reality for people who were born after the 60 years. People have taken advantage of that. So, I just wanted to lay that out.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
I really want you to, if you can, elaborate a little bit on that. Like, what exactly is manufactured reality? Like, what is that term? What does that mean?
Well, it's my term. And basically what it means, people have created a reality for young people who are 60 and under who weren't here. So if you don't have family or a religious organization or an organization that knows the history and passes it down, you're not going to get this from school. It's not in their interest. You may have a teacher or a professor here and there who will make it their business to give you that insight. But for the most part, we have, as I said, 60 years. And I know Sheila's probably going to ask me, but I'll go ahead and move forward. We have 60 years of the impact of heroin epidemic. I just happened to be here before. I've been watching this for 60 years. So at first you had the heroin epidemic, and the heroin came into the communities purposeful. It came in response to the Black Power, the Civil Rights movement, the Young Lords, the women's movement, and particularly the anti-war movement. So the heroin comes in, and it comes in through the FBI and the FBI and organized crime purposely into predominantly Black communities. And the whole idea was to put young people to sleep. And they've been very effective at it. They put people to sleep so they can create your reality. And then later on, between 55 years, then you had the crack epidemic. Now, the difference between heroin and crack, aside from the drug, and not everybody was doing it, was the fact that with heroin, you still have people my age now, then, who can kind of fill in the gaps. But that wasn't the case by the time we get to crack. And so the crack comes from international affairs. This is geopolitical stuff that's impacting us today in 2024. Wow. Whew, time is flying. Yeah. Anyway, so you have the CIA. Actually, you have a conflict happening between Afghanistan and the Soviet Union. It wasn't Russia. It was all these other different countries that came together in the Soviet Union. The CIA is funding the Mujahideen, which most of you know from, well, if you're old enough, in terms of 9/11. If you were like 10, 15 years old, you probably heard the term. And so the CIA is funding the Mujahideen, that is Al-Qaeda, going back to 9/11. But this is 1980s. And they're funding them against the Soviet Union. And then you have the collapse of the Soviet Union, because what we're doing now, they were spending a whole lot of money on war and not on their people. So they couldn't sustain it. So the Soviet Union collapsed. But what was happening, the CIA was funding it by bringing crack into our neighborhoods. I just happened to be not living in South Central, but I was doing work in South Central Los Angeles. And at that time, and you started to see where people were having gates and stuff in front of doors. When I left New Jersey, there were no gates on anybody's doors. You didn't see any of that when I left in the 80s. By the time I came back, you did. Anyway, so the CIA is funding the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union by dropping crack in our neighborhoods. And how they do it, they use media marketing. They say, make it cool, and you can get them to do it. The group think, if they do it, I'm going to do it. So the money, and this goes to immigration issues that people are talking about now, and I know Sheila and I have talked about this to some degree, the immigration primarily in the 1980s starts because the crack going to South America is coming through Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala. And those cartels are starting to form as a result of this money that's funding the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union, but it's running through our neighborhoods purposely. And so as a result of this, you have the building of cartels in these countries, and people begin to leave because of their lives. And where do they head? to the United States, right? So people immigrate here primarily from South America. They were coming from those particular countries because of what was happening in the Soviet Union. See, there's a whole international thing that ends up in our community that, and it's not that people just come immigration for that. Also, U.S. corporations bring them in and then they take them out. This has been going on for like 100 years. You bring the immigrants in when you need them, and then what you do is you cause chaos to make people think that they're taking stuff when they purposely come in. If you know about Hurricane Katrina, which in New Orleans some years ago now, what happened is that they didn't want to bring the Black people who lived there to build the city. So they brought in people from Bangladesh and Thailand and Indonesia to do the work, because you can control them if they don't have their papers, if they're undocumented. You get to control them. So there's a whole lot of things behind it that, we don't really know. So in terms of the manufactured reality, if you don't know these things and you're not getting information, people can shape your reality and get you to respond accordingly. Does that help, Sheila?
Yeah, that helps a lot. But I want to dig a little deeper, right?
Sure.
When we talk about manufacture, we talk about created intentionally, right? Right. And we talk about because a lot of people may not know, and some people may, how the same way Newark is set up and manufactured, it's the same way Chicago, Detroit, like all the urban communities are set up and manufactured and created.
Well,
why did that happen?
Okay, this goes back 30 years ago. I remember this happening on the African continent. And I said, what they're doing to the African continent, they're going to bring to urban areas here, where you have people who look like you, but their strings are being pulled by people who are not necessarily you. And it doesn't hurt that we've moved from a time, particularly in our community, where it was about people, it wasn't about things. And there's a chart that I had, and I don't know if you could pull it up, Sheila.
I'm going to.
This is the one having to do with the differences in cultures.
I don't think I have that one, Dr.
Okay, there's one. It's about the philosophical differences in cultures, and so the majority culture has a culture of acquisition, things. Primarily Black people and people from the African diaspora, whether they speak French or English or Spanish or whatever, they are people where people and relationships are the most important. So what has happened in the last 40 years, what I've observed is that we have begun, meaning the Black culture, and let me just say there's no such thing as race. It's an artificial construct. It was pretty much developed and created for purposes of justifying the inhumanity of one group. That's basically Linnaeus, and there's a lot of work on that. So, let's put color aside, because there's no such thing. There's no such thing as race, but there is culture. And in the African diaspora and the African culture, whether it's people who speak Spanish or French or patois or English, in that culture, it's a culture of relationships. But what has happened in the 40, 60 years in terms of manufacturing reality is that the culture that sustained people from the diaspora for 600 years has been pretty much undermined. And it couldn't have happened. It would not have happened if it wasn't for the 60 years of heroin and the 55 years crack cocaine, because you no longer had the wisdom passing down to the younger people from the elders, so that you don't have to or didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I say that when I was, I'm living in the projects, I'm 9 years old, and the whole concept of senior buildings, that's a new thing. That's a new thing. Senior buildings is a new thing. Right. They were, the people lived together. They didn't have, the nuclear family wasn't exactly what it was for all cultures. Even the Irish and the Italians, they didn't have a nuclear family. It was like the elders were there. So you had this intergenerational exchange of information that could fill the gap. But I have to go further, because I just realized this last year. Right. When I was in grammar school, they began to take away that connection. They started saying, don't trust anybody over 30. And I realized that was the beginning of and this is like the 1960s, 64, 65, 66, about the time the Beatles come in. And if you don't know, the Beatles probably the most famous group in the history of humanity. Absolutely. Music group, right? So And I realized the whole concept of senior buildings. So you're taking the elders out, right? And it's interesting because about 8 years ago, because we had factor COVID 3 years, I remember reading an article with people coming in, immigrants coming in, and how everybody was living together. And what was happening for them is that their lifespan was beginning to expand comparably to white men and white women who live on average, and when you compare them to Black people, 15 to 20 years longer than Black people in this country on average. But these people these individuals from South America were beginning to live longer. And it had, you didn't have to worry about daycare because the grandmother's right there, the grandfather's right there. Somebody you could trust is taking care of the kids, so you don't have that stress. You don't have to take a bus to take them someplace. And so they were beginning, not with the money. It wasn't the money, but it was the fact of having that family unit, right? And, and I think about when I grew up in Scudder Homes, we had 5,000 people. And
yeah, I want you to talk about that. That's what I was going to ask Dr. Carter.
Okay.
I would like you to paint the picture of how we know in our generation the projects to look, to be, and to feel, and how it was when you came.
Okay. Scudder Homes was probably one of the few public housing projects that was built for Black people. Most of the public housing was built for white veterans coming back from World War II and Korea because there was a housing shortage, right? But Scudder Homes was specifically built for the population. It was new. It opened in 1963. There were 5,000 people in 8 buildings over the course of 2 blocks. And you had people who were coming, who lived in Newark already. You had people coming up from the South who had fled the Ku Klux Klan. You had people coming from the South who had been sharecroppers. So it's still early, because for those who may know about the Great Migration of individuals, which was the largest group of human beings moving from one place to another in the history of the United States, from down south to the north. And I was forced, it went from 1916 to 1972, the last year in high school. So I still had the benefit and the luxury of meeting people who were just coming up from the South. And interesting, a lot of their values and the community, the concepts. I mean, like I do adoptions now for the state. We never heard of anybody adopting. Somebody in the community would step up. And if it was nobody in the community, you get sent back down south to be with a grandmother or uncle, or go back to Puerto Rico, because we had a sizable Puerto Rican population that just come up from Puerto Rico. So, everybody knew each other. We ran at each other's houses. You'd be sitting down, you know who you're eating dinner with. Or if we had nothing, right? And a lot of us had nothing because it was a working poor community. So people shared. People were the most important things. The other thing I'll tell you, because this goes to the violence that we hear about in our community. First of all, what people don't know from an archaeological point of view, Black people were not violent people. That's not in our DNA. That's just not who we are. But what has happened, we started adapting other people's cultures, and we started taking on other things. The other part is, trusting people. Trust, like I said, we knew people. You run in each other's houses, everybody on the block. It didn't mean that there wasn't conflict from time to time, but we didn't have guns. Right. Rarely, somebody might have a 22. And if you did, you were ostracized. Like, man, you couldn't box, because Newark boxing was king.
That's right.
If you were black or a Puerto Rican man and you didn't know how to box, you were a punk. Right. If you had to pull a weapon out, you were a punk, because that meant you couldn't box. The weapon, if there was one, was a switchblade. Most people only know what a switchblade is today.
Right.
So you could actually have a fight with somebody, and that person could be your friend for the rest of your life. You didn't kill them and never see them and never get that opportunity again. If we had nothing, and believe me, we had ketchup. Well, I like ketchup and hot sauce. I just like spicy food. But my brothers like the mayonnaise and the butter and the sugar sandwiches.
Right. So, and you know what, Dr. Carter, I don't want to.
It's okay.
So I didn't grow up obviously with you guys, but I do remember that era of, it was like the working poor. It was like everybody was helping and supportive of each other. We had a little, but we were able to share a lot. I remember that, right? I want to bring you to this hierarchy, right? And if I can just share.
The hierarchy chart?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, because this is Yeah, this is it. My picture looked a little cut off, Sheila. We have to.
Let me see.
No, I'm okay. I'm okay now.
Okay.
Yes, make that larger so I can see it. Otherwise, I gotta go in. Can you make it larger for me?
Okay, I'm gonna try my best, buddy. Let me.
Okay, and meanwhile, I'll try to get it and remember it because it's really small.
Okay, let me see what I could do.
Hopefully, the audience can see it more than me, but I'm trying to get it on my phone in the meanwhile.
Yeah, try to get on your phone if you can. I made it large as I could possibly make it.
All right, let me see. So this is the hierarchy of wealth and affluence, and another word I have there, I can't remember. This chart was actually put together by two of my former students who served time in prison. That's the difference between people who went to prison, at least then, and people on the street sometimes, is that they think and they're not necessarily put in the box. They're put in a box, but it's not necessarily a mental box. So let me just see real quick if I can pull it up underneath you. So basically, this chart is to tell you that we're all puppets. At the end of the day, to make this quick, we're all puppets. The idea is to keep us at each other's throats so those at top will stay that way. And I actually have a quote that I wanted to read real quick from one of the former heads of the UN, Kofi Annan. And he said, the obstacles to democracy have little to do with culture or religion and much more to do with the desire of those in power to maintain their position at any cost, right? To maintain their position at any cost. Right now, some of you may have heard, and I just did an interview because I do guest host on a radio program on a Pacifica station. And I interviewed a gentleman who was a nuclear scientist. And he's really working at how to get young people to get involved in preventing nuclear annihilation. People don't even know that we had 8 mistakes that I know of, where 2, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1961-62, if we had that, none of us would be here. I would have had the opportunity, but you guys would never be here in the first place. But you have, people who are willing to think that they can engage in limited nuclear war, right? And if they have to do that to stay in what they think is going to help them stay in their position, they will do that. So if you look on the left-hand side, I have diversions. And the diversions, and I'm trying to see it. Give me a minute here, Sheila. I'm going to see if I could just find it really quickly under your name since I sent it to you last.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I'm hoping that the audience could see it because it's more important that they see it. Oh, I found it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
I've enlarged it for the audience so they can see as well.
Okay. Good. All right. Well, I had it and then it. Wait. It's these crazy phones. See, we didn't have this problem before. All right. Bear with me, guys. I'm sorry. I apologize.
It's cool. Take your time.
No, we don't have that kind of time. I want to make sure.
Yeah, because
wait a minute, I found it again.
Yeah,
I just want to make it bigger. So what you have in the middle on the star, above the star, is the wealthiest people and corporations. Some of them are unknown. Some are private entities, dictators, kings, queens, monarchs, religious organizations, central banks, and so on, dynasty families, and et cetera, et cetera. I would call them the overprivileged. They have more than they need. Then you have the privileged, different categories, and you could probably break them down more, but I just gave an overview. Overprivileged, privileged, middle, upper, lower, and so on, and different classes. And then you get to the upper middle. That would be like working middle class. You would have really, attorneys who work for corporations, accountants, doctors, nuclear scientists, small business owners. And then you have the middle class, and I broke that down into the upper middle, middle, and lower middle. And if you notice at the bottom, you see unemployed, homeless, lower class, poor, where they may, and one of my students, what he did, he used the type of jobs so you can kind of equate the jobs with individuals. Now, this chart was done in 2017. And so it gives you an idea what the middle class is on the far left at the bottom. It has a middle class based on IRS and middle class based on New Jersey in 2017. Above that, you see a sign that says press, and it doesn't say media, it says press. There's a difference between press and media. The role of the press under the First Amendment of the Constitution is to inform the public so they know when the other branches of government, like the legislative, executive, and the judicial are not acting on behalf of the people. The purpose of the Constitution is to serve the people, but the people don't even know that it's a contract between you and government to ensure that they're serving you. So when they're not, the role of the press is to let you know so you can do something about it. And in the Constitution, it gives us the power. It tells us what we can do. Then you have media. The role of media is to get you to buy stuff. That's why they have advertisements, commercials. It doesn't matter if it's television, radio, social media, public relations, propaganda, political spin, all that falls under media. All right. And so I'm going to go to the right real quick. At the time, you had world population of 7.7 billion people at the time, and U.S. population at that time was 330 million people. But my point is, the reason why I did this. Oh, wait a minute. One real interesting. In order to keep the people on the top, they have to create chaos. And that's what most people don't realize what's going on. You all being played. They're the puppeteers, and we're all the puppets. Okay. So what did they do? What are some of the things they do to keep chaos? At this time, 2017, I think Barack Obama and Hillary had just run for office, and everybody's all excited. The first Black man and a woman running for office, but you didn't look at what they were standing for. You just looked at their faces, and you're like, oh, historically, such a good thing. But the media didn't give you the background behind them. All they did was tell you and kept saying, this is a historic thing. It's a woman, it's a man. But you didn't look to see what they said. Now, if you look at Barack Obama, and I encourage everybody to really look at Barack Obama behind him, because he served a particular purpose. Whether you know it, his purpose was to put Black people to sleep. Everybody knew that when Black people were awake, everybody wakes up on the planet. When we went to sleep, everybody goes to sleep. And they knew that Black people in the United States were the moral fiber because of our history. We were considered the moral fiber of this country. Everybody around the world knew this. So you have diversions, right? Political campaigns, Hillary and Barack Obama. Racial division, that's always a good one. Immigration, that's the hot subject right now, because most people don't know that it's to the benefit of the wealthy to bring people in to undercut unions. And so let's say you can't fight Walmart by yourself. And the only way you can fight Walmart or fight against Amazon, you got to have a union. That's why the First Amendment gives you the right to assemble. And that's where the power of the union. You can't do it by yourself. If you don't do it as a community, it's a problem. You just can't do it. They also use movies, materialism, sports. I don't have entertainment, religion. These are the things people do, or not people, with those who want to stay in power do. They create chaos so that everybody's looking at each other, and you never turn around to look up and see who's pulling the strings.
I have a question, Dr.
Go right
ahead.
Thank you for letting me get through my chart. I didn't think we were going to do this, so this is important.
No, that was good. That was very informational. It brings me to the question, again, with manufactured reality. What's the foundation of it?
Oh, the foundation of it goes back 600 years. Wow. Yeah, it goes back 600 years. You have something called the doctrine of Christian dominant discovery. It is created over the course of 60 years by 2 or 3 popes. They issue something called edicts. And then I guess the ultimate document is a papal bull, means this is the law. It does 4 things. First, it says, wherever Europeans go, and it's not the Vikings, it's not the Romans, they're a different group of people. It's this particular group, Danish, Belgium, this whole area, the Portuguese, right? So what happens is that the 4 principles are basically wherever Europeans go, it belongs to them. Now, you may remember Christopher Columbus kind of ended up in Venezuela, Haiti, Cuba area. He didn't even know where he was, but it didn't matter. Under the doctrine of Christian dominant discovery, it belonged to them. Okay. The second is that Europeans are superior to everybody else, right? And that's where you get the concept of others. If you're not that, you're another. The third thing is you must be subjugated by them. You must submit yourself to them. And the fourth, you must accept their religion. Now, this was incorporated in U.S. law in 1823 in a case called Johnson v. McIntosh. It was also carried out in the Monroe Doctrine that said the United States gets to call the shots, and I'm making this quick, call the shots regarding decisions having to be made for countries in the Western Hemisphere, from Canada all the way to the tip of South America, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Mexico, that the United States gets to call the shots for this Western Hemisphere. Nobody else can come in. And then in 2005, Ruth Bader Ginsburg basically says in a decision, Sherrill versus Oneida Indians, that the United States is the predecessor in interest to the doctrine of Christian dominant discovery. Now, they call it manifest destiny because I think if they said that, if they used the words, people would maybe ask questions. I will tell you that indigenous people from here in what they call the Western Hemisphere, Turtle Island, all the way to the tip, they've been very aware and paying attention and trying to, manage through this for 600 years. And so it comes from that. And then later on, you have something, and Sheila, I thank you for going to get the book for me, called Propaganda, Edward Bernays. Right. Edward Bernays is the architect of propaganda. There's not really propaganda until he comes. He's the master of propaganda. He's the nephew of Sigmund Freud. So he uses Sigmund Freud's psychology and incorporates that. And he's excellent at groupthink. I call it the Beyonce effect. Whatever she does, everybody else does. So he was doing this in the turn of the century. And if you look him up, I would encourage people to look him up, but start with his daughter's documentary of him, because that's his daughter. So her insight into it is a little bit different. Edward Bernays gets, and he's really the architect of what I call, or the beginning of consumer economy. He gets, because remember, Black people are not, Puerto Ricans are not part of the consumer economy. It's basically white people. And it's not wealthy white people. That's not what I'm saying. But basically what he does, he uses silent film actors. Mary Pickford, I'm into silent films. I'm sorry, I really am. But he gets movie stars to convince people to start buying things they want outside of what they need. And that's sort of like the beginning of the consumer economy, people buying stuff. And he's excellent with groupthink. And I remember my mother saying back in the neighborhood, they would say, well, so-and-so jumps off a bridge, you're going to jump off the bridge too? That's part of, don't get involved in groupthink. Think for yourself, but act collectively, act communally, but don't do it that way. And then you have, what else he does? He gets us into World War I. He gets women to smoke cigarettes. And I don't know if I can use this on your show, but what he does, this is doing the suffrage movement. Women are trying to get the right to vote. And it's ideal time because they're trying to get power. And so the cigarette is to represent to women a certain kind of power that men get through a particular piece of anatomy. How's that? So this piece of anatomy in them gives them power. And for women, it becomes cigarette. And you start seeing, if you watch old movies, you start seeing the women, Betty Davis, all these very powerful women with cigarettes, right? So the hardest job that Edward Bernays has is to convince women to use cake mix. And I just happen to remember that because I remember when people started using cake mix. Everybody cooked scratch. That's first of all. Nobody went to fast food stores. It's interesting. I was telling my students the other day, I said, I never had a cold or the flu. They gave us collard boil. They did preventative things because not everybody had healthcare. And now healthcare is not preventative, but they gave you things really. And if you have grandparents, please talk to them because they may have these remedies. There's things that you can do. If we knew our history, it's a lot of things just to keep us from getting sick in the first place. Preventative measures.
Well, and I don't mean to.
No, that's okay.
We got more questions and time is rolling. Okay. But I do want to say in terms of what you're saying, because he did a lot of harm, even with convincing us that we needed breakfast and the 3 and 4 course meals. We didn't need any of that.
How about this, Sheila?
Led to obesity.
Still, what you see in terms of on social media, Beyonce, all that marketing stuff, he's still controlling things.
Right.
Absolutely. He died. Matter of fact, he worked from World War I all the way to the Clinton administration. And if you see his video, he's like laughing at people like, look what I've done to you. But he actually, what's interesting is that the techniques that he devised, have been used and are still used in 2024. And that's when your title is Married to the Lie. He is the architect of getting people to look over here and not there.
Right.
And he still has an impact in 2024 from the turn of the century. He's not even here, and he's still kind of controlling what we're doing.
Because it's like the will, it's a machine at this point, and it just keeps rolling. I want to touch on something you also said really quickly. We talk so much in our communities about the impact of removing the dads from the home, right? I want you to talk a little bit on, because you mentioned a couple of times, which I think is so important, the grandparents in this, because I know a lot of the wisdom that I have, it came from my grandmother raising me. And I want you to talk about, if you will, the impact of removing the grandmothers out of the home, because the grandmothers used to be in the house with mom.
Well, it was a family. It was a father too. Well, let me just tell you this, and we can take it. First of all, like I said, there are 3 papers if people are interested, because these people were 50 years ahead of us all the time. One is called
say that again.
50 years at least ahead of us. One is Crisis in American Democracy. It was written in response to the Black Power, Civil Rights, the women's movement, anti-war movement. They basically said, how dare these young people try to make us accountable? That's one. The second one is the Powell Memorandum. And Powell, he was the attorney for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been mad at Franklin Roosevelt for like almost 100 years now, because how dare he be one of them, an elite? And I will tell you that the Roosevelt family was involved in the opium trade. That's where the heroin. Interesting, when the Taliban were in charge in certain parts over in the quote Middle East, the heroin went down in this country. And as soon as they went over there, the heroin went back up. But having said that, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been mad at the efforts to, well, they actually want to privatize everything now. That's the best. And the last one is Project for a New American Century, that goes to, and there's no such place as Middle East. It's longitude, latitude. That's really East Africa or West Asia that everybody's talking about, or the Mediterranean. But it's called Project for a New American Century. It comes out of the Bush administration, and that's about controlling the resources in that part, particularly the oil. And if you look at the Congo, because you can't drive your car, we wouldn't be talking to each other if they weren't pimping the Congo.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
go back, because I may have lost a little bit, because I wanted to give you that background.
No, I want you to give it to you, but I want to just pause it and to see for a moment. Somebody had a question that I'd love for you to respond to. It says, ask Dr. Carter to speak about what's happening in our monetary system with the 100-year time frame coming up on the reset of the global monetary system. The United States dollar losing its world reserve currency status to the next leaders of the world, BRICS nations, etc.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on economics, but I'm teaching myself. Right. I do know about the BRICS. I can tell you that it's the dollar losing its standard is not so much, from what I understand, is not so much from the BRIC. That is a potential threat. But, everybody's looking at these countries like they're the same, and they're not necessarily the same.
That's right.
If you look at their politics, but they have another motive. They're actually, if they can start another system, they will. But you have India. India is close to the United States and to Israel, right? So Saudi Arabia, which the United States is trying to get back in the fold so they can maintain a relationship with Israel. But Saudi Arabia and who else do you have in the BRICS? You have Brazil. And I'm looking at the question too. Mm-hmm. Saudi Arabia laugh and don't take our government seriously. But actually, if you know about Chris Hedges, he's a former priest, but he was also a New York Times journalist, international. He talks about all of this is leading to the decline of the empire of the United States. That, in terms of the specifics, going back to the person who just sent the note, that's just part of the decline. It would be, if you have the decline of the empire, the United States, this would be the shortest term for any empire, like 300 years. I mean, when you talk about the doctrine of Christian dominant discovery, you're talking about 6, but most empires have lasted longer than that. But the other part, you have so many other threats like nuclear annihilation, environmental. There's so many potential threats. But the dollar is critical That's really critical. But also you have the cryptocurrency too. So you have to take in consideration the BRICS, cryptocurrency.
Right.
I don't know enough about it, but maybe the person who sent that chat in terms of what's going on with China. I just saw something with China, but in answer to their question, I can't really speak to it other than to say that those countries are not like all socialist countries, or they're capitalist, different degrees, but they've come together for a particular reason. And I really don't know enough about it to speak on it now, but when you bring me back, I'll be sure to learn.
So let me say this for the person with the question, because I don't see a name on where I'm looking. It just says Facebook user. Next week on Wednesday, we'll be airing W.A.G.E live. It's live streamed every Wednesday at 8, and that's actually what we have on the docket for next week to discuss exactly that. But while I still have Dr. Carter here in this 8:58, we're gonna have a few more minutes. Dr. Carter, what could we do, if anything, to turn this around? Since we've been married to the lie, we want to know if evolution is even possible.
Okay.
Right? It's 6 decades, right?
All right.
Can we
so I got solutions, right? Eat as well as you can, exercise, and be healthy. That's first of all. Okay. Read everything you can get your hands on. Don't trust Google. You guys, it's automatic for you because you don't know. I have the luxury of the library. The library is the only place not collecting your data. I see people who are quoting stuff on the internet that's an advertisement. People don't even know. Learn how to manage the internet. Don't let it manage. I read about this when I was in the 1960s and 70s. I was reading about this. It was supposed to make life easier. It wasn't supposed to control us. Locate and watch Gil Noble Like It Is. If you want to learn about the community, it's hard because they took a lot of this stuff off of Google. Locate and watch Tony Brown's Journal. These are programs that were done some time ago, but the information is part of you learning your history. Because if you don't know your history, somebody else is, that's right. We go back to manufacturing reality. Other people are going to tell you what your history is. Learn the language, terms, and words that we must know to interpret what elected officials are talking about. Otherwise, it's like they're speaking Farsi. You don't have a clue and you just go along. So learn the terms, language, and words. Music, Black music has always served as the superpower of the masses, right? From the spirituals all the way up to at least Ain't No Stopping Us Now. Action. I would tell you, if you want to learn, and you can see what has happened to us with the music in terms of, there was a song I heard before we came on, Money, Money, Money. I remember that was the beginning of us moving from people are the most important. When we heard somebody for the first time getting shot over material things, we just like, what? Movies. There are old movies that educate and send messages. People used to do that. Learn media literacy. Where people who are talking to you, the first thing you want to know is who they're representing, what's the mission of the organization, and how it's being funded, because that's going to have some impact, sizable influence over the information you get. Learn and study the structure and process of the U.S. government and how it works. Doesn't mean they're not going to change on you, but if you know the basics. The other thing, Frank Zappa, I don't have enough time for that. Understand the economic connection between the system of neo-capitalism and FDR capitalism. One means nothing public, right? It's like a libertarian. Everything has a dollar to it. And then the FDR, like the post office, is where people were put back to work by the government, not by corporations, because government's job is not to make a profit. So there's not any middleman. When you put a middleman there, somebody's going to make a profit. Taxpayers going to pay more money. There's Adam Clayton Powell. I'm just going to mention quickly. He talks about what's in your hand, right? Where you spend your money. Do the people respect you? You just give them your money and they don't have to give you any respect. So it may not seem like a big deal. So there's a lot of things. We have a lot of power. And interesting, if our forefathers, our ancestors thought they had no power, we would not be here, right? We would not be here because they knew they had power. Whether they were being beaten, whether they were being bred like animals, they knew they had power. They knew they had a high power, but they had to do the footwork, right? And because, I mean, you're talking about people who put their lives on the line for generations to come, people they would never know. They loved us enough to make sure that we were here. I think we have an obligation, especially those older, as I said in the beginning, to give you everything so you don't have to start from scratch, because that's what they did. They
Right.
did everything they could. They could not be selfish. It couldn't be about material things. It
Mm.
had to be about the future. And if you know anything about indigenous people, they think 7 generations, everything I do today, what impact is going to have the people I may never see. And that's what our ancestors did. And so that intergenerational conversation, you got to talk to your elders. Go into nursing homes. I know it's post-COVID, whatever. Talk to your elders. Sheila and I do this all the time.
Because I'm a elder in training, right? Right, Dr.
Right.
Carter?
Exactly. She's an elder in training.
That's
Right.
right.
Exactly.
I
And
love that.
so it's so important that we pass this information down from a health point of view, right? You don't have to go to the doctor, everything. There's things you could do, like not, I'm thinking White Castle going to White Castles was a luxury. You only went to fast food once. We didn't have all these fast food.
Right.
We didn't have people who were in a healthy, we didn't have people who were, I'm thinking out of 5,000 people in 2 blocks, there were 3 people who would be considered heavy, but they were big, but they were solid. You didn't have like flabbing. It was no flab. They were just solid, but they were bigger.
Yeah.
I'm not, I was just always puny. So that doesn't, I was not the normal. I was jealous because everybody else was voluptuous. And I would be walking around in August with long sleeve shirts on because my arms were so little.
Let me pause for 1 minute, Dr. Carter, please.
I'm done.
No. And listen, it said one person says, please share their info. So it's on the screen with Dr. Carter. This person wants to more than likely get in touch with you. Someone else says,
wait, I didn't get the number.
No, it's going to be there.
Oh, okay. So give it to me later.
Okay, it'll be there. Another one says, I noticed in the Newark public schools, they no longer teach economics or teach the students about the running of the government. And
Let me give you this
I wanted to hear from you.
Real quick.
Yeah, with the voting piece.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem. Because they're doing this whole thing right now and they're not doing civics. Let me just tell you, they took civics out of the school system in urban areas after the white flight. And what is happening, you have people in wealthy school districts who are learning civics. Not only are they learning civics, they're learning how to manage our elected officials so that they can benefit from our tax money.
Absolutely.
So the thing is that, civics is like, that's my thing. All the stuff we have power in, and we have so much power, but we don't know. So when you talk about your topic, married to the lie, one of the lies is we don't want you to have power. Second, I want to keep you all confused and chaos so you never turn around and look who the puppeteers are, right? Because as long as you do that and you're fighting with each other, we don't have to worry about you. And the sad part, as I said, Black people were the moral fiber of this planet, right? And when we went to sleep, everybody went to sleep.
That's right. That's right. Very important to know. Dr. Carter, with the statistics that are constantly out in the newspaper, in every publication possible about the students now reading, not reading, should I say, 4 out of 5, just 3rd graders not reading. As a college professor, what are your thoughts on that?
Real quick, about 50 years ago or more, in Urbana, Illinois, there was a conscious effort by people in the construction and development area, where the lawyers, architects, people owned steel companies, fencing companies, and they made a decision because they were no longer going to be building, military installations in the U.S. And they set their sights on building prisons, right? This is over 50 years ago. And they did it in prisons because they said they didn't have to worry about the people and basically our communities, right? Whether or not they have leverage. And I can tell you 50 years ago, we had more leverage because we didn't have the same challenges that we have right now. And not only were they going to focus on poor people, that meant, going back to your point about men not in the home, single family homes, this was a conscious effort. It was a conscious effort. But the other part was they wanted to make sure that the laws would guarantee. So there are a whole lot of things, a whole lot of laws. As an attorney, I can tell you, I can see the changes. When people used to be, you would go to school and be on school playgrounds playing till like 10 o'clock at night. Now I see teachers' cars parked in the playground. That's one. Mm-hmm. That's a problem because you don't have activities for young people, and particularly in urban areas, because they need to be challenged, right?
Right.
So it was a conscious effort when I had to represent people because there was trespass charges against them for being on school property when you would want children to be on. But this was part of changing the laws to guarantee the population. So you have changed the law for that. And then in terms of people's reading abilities, if you can't read, they actually determine how many beds they're going to need for prison based on what the reading comprehension is by the time people are in the third grade.
Right, right. And for the life of me, and I'm just going to say this, if you have small children, please go back to the basics, the flashcards, the colors, the sight words. Teaching reading is not Chinese arithmetic, right? It level books, right? Things that you can get offline, phonics, and again,
There you go. Phonics is really important. They took phonics out again. It was taken out, not matter of fact. It was taken out because in order to ensure people can read well, phonics would guarantee that you can read well. So all of these things, when you talk about the lie, and I talked about, my concept was manufacturing the reality. Yours is pretty much the same thing. The reality is making sure that you don't know what the reality is. Learn your history. You're not going to learn these things in school. There's so many people who have never heard of, we have Black History Month, but I lived during that time, and it's just interesting. I actually bought this book today on Amos Wilson, and he had actually a blueprint for Black Power. This generation doesn't have to redo things from scratch. You just have to study. And I know with social media, everybody's like really quick, but you're going to I can tell you right now, if you don't take the time now, because Sheila and I were talking beforehand about how much time she has. If you don't make the time now, it's going to get worse. I've seen it. It's gotten worse.
Yeah, we have to, and I'm going to tell you just one thing that has gotten worse that I'd love for you to elaborate on. And I know we're taking a little bit of time, but Sarah Barton, right? We know the story of Sarah Barton, right? They put in circuses because of her body shape, and now we have women, right, with the same propaganda tool that you were talking about with Eric Benes earlier, right? And women don't understand feminism, right? I didn't learn about those concepts till I was in college. So with 80%, right, at least of New Yorkers not even going to college, right? How much feminism do they really understand? We know that March is Women's Suffrage Month, but many women, young women in this younger generation, they don't even know what women went through to be able to gain respect, and we still battle against.
Actually, it's interesting you say that, but see, I also realized that if you were not here and you had no elders in your life, you had your grandmother, and you had no elders, and the churches and the mosques are not there, and you don't have community, you don't have the cultural protections we had, right? And remember, I told you my mother died, I was 19. I'm the oldest of 9, but I had cultural protections just from the culture. And so you can't really blame them because it's not their fault. But Sarah Barton, one thing is that in the turn of the century, when the dresses, if you see the old pictures and the dresses were pumped out, that was modeled after her and her butt. That style was modeled after her.
That's right.
But the other part is that when I grew up, we did everything possible to prove that what they said about women, what they said about Black people was not true. That they weren't whores, they weren't all these negative things. And so now when I'm watching television, and I'm not a big television person, but when I turn and I see, these programs, and I can't really fault the young people who don't know, because it had 3 generations, 6 decades of a disconnect where you didn't have the flow of information for thousands of years that worked for us. They don't have, right? So if we don't do it on an individual basis with our families, or if for some reason I have like young people like Sheila and other people who just come to me, and we have these conversations, not everybody has this. And actually, if you think about, well, I better not say that, but the fact is, we'll talk about it later, Sheila. But
you're on the right path as always, Dr. Carter. Someone said that they couldn't share the live. So listen, when you said that, I went to my phone to make it public, and I don't know why it always kind of goes to default of just friends. I don't know why it does that. It's not supposed to do that, but it's fixed now. And if you haven't shared it, please take the opportunity to. If you can share it to other groups, please do. We want to make sure that we extend the knowledge. Like Dr. Carter says, a lot of us don't have the grandparents in our homes anymore. A lot of us don't have access to this knowledge, right? And knowledge is important because knowledge is power. Like there's times like you hear on this show, I try to cut Dr. Carter off a little bit, but Dr. Carter will call me when she feels like calling me. And it's understood that I don't open my mouth, that I listen. Don't let that little nice meekness fool you. When she says I'm an elder in training, I'm in training, I better shut up. And so I share that to say that a lot of us, and I'm not a younger woman by any stretch, maybe,
I'm old enough to be her mother.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, absolutely, women have to learn how to be humble and how to not overtalk the teacher, if you will, right? And a lot of us got a lot of ego and don't like to be told anything because we're not used to being told anything. The way that my grandmother raised me was quite different from the way my mother's generation, right, during that crack epidemic, raise the children. And now it's all about, well, what do the children think? Let's get into their feelings. We didn't get to think. We were seen and not heard. We needed to listen. We needed to be quiet. And so now you have the kids running amok, running the schools in many instances, right? And it's just going to not bode well for them, right? It's part of the non-reading. I just saw a group of kids in some area walk out because the schools told them they couldn't no longer use the cell phones. Why do you need to use a cell phone? That became huge during 9/11. If there's no emergency, why do you need to be on the cell phone all day? And you can form a dependency on that. And so how
it's an addiction. It's
Yeah,
an addiction,
absolutely.
but it's meant. See, these things don't. That's the lie part. Keep in mind, it's just not. It just happened. Remember, I said for the most part, people are 50 years. There's something happening. I mentioned to you before, called Heritage 2024. It's 75, not foundations, but think tanks. These are people who draft policy. Alec, you remember Stand Your Ground? They write it and they give it to elected officials to pass. And sometimes elected officials don't even read it.
I remember that.
Right. And so one time they did it and they left their letterhead. They left the letterhead on. That's how lazy elected officials can be. See, people forget elected officials are not leaders. They go wherever the wind blows. So if you don't know how to make them accountable, you're on the table for the food for them. Somebody just sent a note. I remember.
Yeah, I remember doing the
I'm glad they said that because college is not for everybody. And when we were in school, they taught us how to sew and how to cook, in case you didn't know at home, which means that there were many people who came out of high school and were able to start their own businesses, fixing cars, whatever. And they took that out of the schools. And I asked the superintendent of schools, I said, I told him that all the equipment that they use to teach people shop and sewing is being housed in warehouses around the country that taxpayers are paying for. And he said, well, liability issues. I said it was no liability issues then. And I knew people who never went to work for anybody else because they knew how to sew. They didn't go to Walmart because you knew how to sew. You know how to cook. You didn't go to fast food because you knew how to cook. They taught us how to save money in the event that you didn't save money.
Right.
You had to put so much money in. You got your milk money. All these things were taught in high school. I mean, not high school, grammar school.
Right, in grammar school. And many of them was taught at home. Like I said, I know how to this day, make food from scratch. I know how to scrub clothes clean on a
wait a minute, I will show you, but I can't now. I have a scrub board that my sister gave me. My mother washed all our clothes, sheets, towels, blankets on a scrub board in the sink. We did not go to the laundromat. We didn't have that kind of money.
Wow, right? Somebody referred to NPS, Newark Public Schools, as slave camps.
Well, actually, hopefully Sheila will bring me back. I do have some leg irons that were on a chattel slave in 1826, but somebody borrowed them for another presentation this month. But I really would like to do that. Back then, right. Well, you know what? And I'm looking at it. You're absolutely right. You can get a room. Well, first of all, you had public housing.
Right.
This affordable housing is not public housing. Public housing meant you paid 25% of whatever your income was. And if you were a single guy, there's a hotel on the corner of Martin Luther King and Elizabeth Avenue. You can literally go downtown, shine shoes, at Penn Station, get a room for $2.50 a night. So there were no homeless people, right? There were no homeless people because you had public housing. And, affordable housing is not the same. So I'm glad the person saying, the last thing I'll say is livable wage.
Right.
Livable wage was when one person in the house could work. You could buy a house off that salary, pay a mortgage for 30 years, and then you don't refinance or anything. You own the house. Take your family on vacation for 2 weeks. Give your kids an allowance and pay for them to go to college. We haven't had that because during the Nixon administration, which many of you may not know, but Nixon he started going after the unions. And that was the beginning because inflation and salaries weren't keeping up with the cost of living. And so now we have where we have now. We're in Newark. I understand the average salary is $37,000 a year based on the census I last looked at. That's before taxes. And the average rent is $1,500 a month.
Right.
That has a lot that goes back. It didn't just start now. It goes back. And so, there was a T-shirt I had wanted Sheila to show. I don't know. It said, if you don't know your history, people are going to make it up for you. Do your own work.
I'm gonna share a couple of the T-shirts.
Okay.
Dr. Carter, if that's okay. Did I know you?
Whatever we can show. I think. How long do we have for the program?
Until we're done.
I know you got to go.
We're landing the plane. We're landing the plane. Okay, this is the first shirt.
Oh yeah, this is one of people without a knowledge of their history, right? I can't read the rest of it.
Let's see here.
I sent it to you. I have to look at my phone. It's too small for my eyes.
It says, a people without a knowledge of their history is like a tree without roots. Mark Garvey.
Right. You just tilt over. Or somebody creates it for you. Manufactured what? Reality.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What's the other one? You're going to run a couple by?
Yeah, I'm going to run a couple by.
Okay. Thank you. And I just want to thank your audience for those who stayed and thought it was worthwhile to listen to me. I would normally, and I always want people to do an evaluation for me because I only had one job interview in my whole life, and that was for a babysitting job when I was 12. So I really like evaluations. Please let Sheila know how you feel. Was this worth your time? Because that's the only interview I ever had. These are T-shirts because I so love living in the Central Ward. And I so love living in Scudder Homes. It was just an amazing time, and we still do reunions. We were losing so many people during the AIDS epidemic that we decided to have a reunion. Really, the guys decided because we had people we had somebody come from Saudi Arabia in the military who hitchhiked to get to our reunion. That's how close we were. And it just, it doesn't matter where people are. There's a lot of people we lost because of the heroin, later the AIDS and the crack. But those of us who are still alive, this is our 25th year doing it because people got tired of going to funerals and said we need to just get together in a better space, no matter what conditions you are. We still losing a lot of people, but to have the opportunity, because I get my energy when I go there. I know I'm good for the year. As soon as I see my people from the projects, I can do anything.
Right. That's a blessing.
Oh, this is a T-shirt.
Yeah. Who's creating your reality?
Is it you? And the only way is for you to think for yourself, not let the internet or Google control manage it. That's just some close-ups.
Okay.
That looks like somebody's W9.
Definitely not anything we're trying to get into.
No, we're not trying to do it W9.
Okay, so those are the T-shirts. I just want to just say hello to our listening audience. And as always, thank you guys for always just showing up and supporting the show. We want to bring other shows to you that are very relevant to what we're dealing now, which is why the next couple of shows, Married to the Law, those episodes are going to be geared toward the economic situation, wages. Why are people working 8 hours? Some people working 12 hours a day and still finding it impossible to make ends meet, and what we could do about that, right? We need to understand it, and it's a lot that we don't understand. Somebody says, oh my God, I need to talk to the great professor. That number is there on the screen. And again, Professor Carter, you can get this number back from the screen. It'll still be there.
Okay.
Yeah. So listen, with that being said, again, just thank you so much for joining the show. Professor Carter, someone is asking great question. Can you give your Facebook and Instagram?
Okay, first of all, I like to talk to people, right? And the only reason why I even had that is I ran for council at large.
That's right.
And they told me I needed to do that. But I come from people are the most important thing. So, you contact Sheila, she'll contact me because I'd rather talk to people. I'm not doing that, but I will if young people ask me to come on, I'll come on. But in terms of communicating, I like to see people and like to talk to people. We're human beings first.
Right.
And as I said, culturally, people are the most important thing to us, not things.
We're trying to work on Dr. Carter getting us a place, right? A home for W.A.G.E, so that we can actually come together to do the show in the community, have a live audience there, as well as to have a space where people could come to get resources, and we can create a bigger venue of, these discussions and just ways to bring us together, in unity and unison, and, just grow to be more cohesive together. With that being said, the show is now done for all intents and purposes, but I do want to spend the last 60 seconds making sure that Dr. Carter just share last words with us at this time. And thank you for joining everyone.
Yeah, I would just say, I went to law school not to make money. I went to law school to provide information to folks that would keep them out of trouble, preventative measures. I'm about how we not get into situations. And basically that's looking at your history. But I get a lot of free stuff that would not be available, or I have access, or I come across things like the New Jersey State Bar Foundation has all this information and our people don't know about it. So, I try to send it to people who they consider themselves people on the ground. So this information is here: landlord, tenant, guardianship, adoptions, divorces, things like that. So I'll send it to Sheila, and Sheila, you can put it up so people can go, at least they can go to the website and get it. When I go to events and I see people, I see everybody but us. We don't know.
Absolutely.
We don't know. So if I'm not sharing, and that's, I grew up, that's what we do. You share whatever you have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for joining us this evening. And to everybody else, our listener audience, thank you for watching the show. Please share it. Please help us expand our outreach of information. And until next time, everyone, remember to wage love. Peace.
Good night.
A 14-year-old boy with a record of drug arrests was shot and killed. It was the 10th fatal shooting or stabbing in Newark in 10 days.
Another deadly shooting investigation is underway tonight in Newark. This comes after a wave of violence erupted.
First, let me introduce y'all to the mayor, and I'm saying mayor because that's what it is. Some call me Sheila or Silver Bullet, just know I'm all about handling biz. First, we're gonna start by saving the kids, making the city a safe place to live. Unlike some people, that's all about self. My only mission right now is to give, and now it's feeling like Resident Evil with all of these fake political leaders. They need to go sit in the bleachers and just stay motivational speakers. Being the mayor is not for the weak. Got my feet on the ground and I'm out in these streets. You can show me with action, it's not what you speak. Say you for the city ain't beat. Lit the city on fire, we're walking through ashes. Parents are tired of giving you passes. Why are our children not learning in classes? Teach about businesses, real estate taxes. Fighting to keep low income housing. So much corruption, it's astounding. Team North, we can't allow that. And there ain't no way to get around that. Nothing but change when you vote for me. Time to get back where we supposed to be. Open the door, open the door.